Welcome back, everyone. Well, now we're getting ready to figure out what's going on in the world of an addict, or should we call them that? We're going to find out if we should label individuals as addicts and a lot more with one of the cutting edge figures in the addiction field for over 4 decades. His name is Dr. Stanton Peele. He has a PhD and a JD. Stanton has written 12 books, including The Meaning of Addiction, Diseasing of America, The Truth About Addiction and Recovery, and his newest book coming out right now, and just a few months ago it came out, Recover, ! An empowering program to help you stop thinking like an addict and reclaim your life. So let's welcome Dr. Peele to the show. Welcome, Dr. Peele.
So good to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, Dr. Peele, tell us a little bit about your new book, Recover.
Well, I feel we've gone too far in the diagnostic direction by telling people, labeling people with problems with substances and other things as addicts, and often demanding that they call themselves and regard themselves as addicts. I don't think that whole process is helpful because, in general, we don't recognize it, but people are more or less likely to change, often on their own, without our help. And in planting this concept that they're an addict, as though that's some permanent part of their identity, does nothing so much as to halt their chances of progressing beyond their addiction.
That's I like that. It's very interesting. Yeah, because it kind of does insinuate that they become like a mole in a sense, right? The addict itself becomes like a mole in your body. It's part of your anatomy or some sort.
Exactly. I mean, let me tell you about an exercise I do. I'll talk to a large group of people, often a lot of them recovering, and I'll go, tell me, what's the hardest substance addiction to quit? What do you think they will answer? And there's hardly ever any question about it. They all say the same thing. What do you think they say?
The hardest thing to quit?
Yep.
I'll say heroin.
No. They always say smoking.
Smoking.
And then I go, tell me, has anybody in this room quit a smoking addiction? And, often a majority of the people in the room raise their hand. Do you know anybody who's quit a smoking addiction, by the way?
Actually, yeah, my dad did.
How old was he?
He smoked from 26 years old till about, till 55. He smoked for 30 years, and then he went to Betty Ford Clinic, and in 2 months, he's never smoked again, and since 1994.
Well, that's not exactly, you have a treatment-oriented family, because when I do this exercise, I say, how many of you have gone through treatment? I just did it on Friday at a workshop at Adelphi College University in New York. About 35 people raised their hand in a group of 60. And when I asked them how many of you were treated, meaning usually, like a drug replacement, a nicotine replacement, only one woman raised her hand out of 35. Pretty remarkable, don't you think?
Oh, wow, that is.
Well, but it's not unusual to get that kind of a response. And then, one woman, I picked one woman who didn't use therapy, and I said, how did you quit? And she said, oh, for God's sake, I tried to quit for years, and I was really, really worried about it, my health and everything. I would go to bed at night and say I won't smoke in the morning, and then I would. But then I quit. What lesson do you take away from that story, by the way?
That's really fascinating. Oh, it tells me we have the agency of being able to do it. We can do it if we really put our minds to it.
Yes, and it wasn't easy. She wasn't like a success story, like, oh, I woke up and I quit today. She applied the words diligence, kind of due diligence occur. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
In other words, it's not easy to quit, but she wanted to quit, and eventually she quit. And the funny thing is, she would almost be a good ad for Chantix, where they would say, oh, I couldn't quit. I tried for years, but then I took Chantix and I quit, except for the fact she didn't take Chantix. She eventually, by repeatedly trying and applying herself, quit. And, she's not an old woman. I would guess she was about not yet 50 when in this class. So people can do it. And they have exactly the word you used. I like the word you used. Thanks. Agency. That agency means you have the power within yourself. So the title of my book has Recover with an exclamation point, which is a little bit cheeky. But what I'm trying to do is to coach people by saying, look, you can do it. It's doable. I mean, I'm not going to hold you guilty or blame you if you don't do it, but you can do it. People do it. You can do it. Think about other successes you've had in your life. For example, I'm a psychologist, and I'll encounter people who are trying to quit a variety of substances, and often they've quit some other substance previously. For example, somebody's trying to quit drinking, and I'll say, have you quit any other habits? And they say, well, I quit smoking. And I say, well, you're sort of an expert on quitting addictions, aren't you? I mean, you already have done it, and you're an expert on quitting for yourself. I mean, what am I going to tell you about quitting addiction when you already know how to do it?
I like that. So you try to point out their own strengths and their own tools that they use to be able to stop it.
Exactly right. And, one famous study, there's a Harvard Global Initiative for ending tobacco. And one thing they do is they give out nicotine replacement. They actually did a study comparing over years. They did follow-ups every 2 years for 6 years, for 8 years, after they quit, whether they quit on their own or using nicotine replacement. There was no difference in the overall results, but the more dependent the smoker was, I wonder if you know where I'm going to go with this. Can you guess?
No.
The more dependent the smoker was, the more likely he was to relapse, or she, if they used the nicotine replacement. Why would you think that is, if you had to kind of explain that?
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. I'm assuming because it's mimicking the behavior they had before, and now they want the full effect, I'm guessing here.
But why is it they're more likely to relapse, the ones who rely on the gum, than the ones who quit cold turkey?
I guess maybe at that point they weren't using their true agency. They were using a crutch, you can say?
Right. And, of course, you always have the compliance problem when you're relying on a drug. Is the person really going to take cigarettes for the next 2 or 5 or 10 years? Somewhere along the line, they're probably going to have to settle down and say, I've quit. I'm no longer dependent on nicotine. And if you do it on your own, you kind of confront that issue right straight ahead. And the message you give yourself and other people is, well, I can quit. I did quit. I know I could quit. So I don't want to just limit ourselves to smoking here, but people are often surprised to learn that the same holds true for alcohol. It holds for heroin and cocaine as well. I cite data in the book showing that people quit all sorts of addiction. And then I turn to something called mindfulness, which comes out of both psychology and out of Buddhism, where people learn to focus on their emotional states and not to react to it. It's, what you can imagine, somebody sitting quietly and thinking about how they're feeling. And that's an interesting exercise people can learn to do. And it's been employed now, and there articles have been published in the Journal of the American Medical Association showing that people who learn mindfulness relapse prevention are significantly less likely to relapse from whatever addiction they're retreating from. They learn to examine a kind of an emotional state they're having, like a craving, and to kind of, in a way, turn it over in their minds and defang it, so to speak. You know what I mean?
Yes.
When you can picture it as sort of, well, I'm feeling this way. And one thing we teach them to do in the book is to ride it like a wave. Have you ever ridden a wave and it rises and then it falls again? Imagine your reaction, your need for this drug or whatever at this one moment as a kind of a rising wave that's going to fall again. And teaching those kinds of mind control techniques, as I said, they go under the name of mindfulness or mindfulness meditation, have been shown to significantly impact people's resistance to relapse with a whole range of addictions.
Interesting stuff. Now, some people might push back a little bit in regards to like a cocaine because the amount of damage it can do to the brain. Do you think, in your opinion, does the amount of damage that cocaine can do to the brain or other drugs hinder the ability for that person's agency or volition at all?
They've actually done research. It's amazing to be. If you think about, well, who quit smoking? I mean, when the Surgeon General's report came out in '64, or when you think about it, when people realize they're having bad health, and they quit right away, and then others linger, you start thinking, well, the ones who linger, there must be something wrong with them or different. Likewise, cocaine or alcohol, what the heck's the matter with them? The data research show remarkably, and it's almost hard to ponder this, they're just as likely to quit at any time in their addiction career. In other words, let's say that over 20 years, 50% quit any addiction. Then you say, well, the people who are left, they're really addicts. They're never going to quit. But over the next 10 years, just the same percentage of all those who fail to quit now quit again. People always retain the ability to come to grips with themselves despite how poor their history has been up till then about quitting. The human being, the human mind is remarkably resilient. We can never downcut it.
How does the impact of the socioeconomic environment or their support system play a role?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, when you say people quit, often without treatment, I guess it depends what you mean by treatment. In other words, obviously, the biggest single thing that makes people, what do you think the biggest single thing that makes people quit addictions is? Talking about their lives and their environments. If you had to guess, what would you say?
Either their mortality is in danger or their children.
Well, that's it. That's important. What's that?
Or their children?
Exactly right. Becoming a parent, getting pregnant, considering getting pregnant, both husband and father and mother, or actually having children is a single life event that's most likely to get people to quit any form of addiction. And, I'm in danger now if you were to say to me, well, that's a brilliant thing you've discovered. It's sort of kind of commonsensical, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, people who have been, quote, bad up until that moment. I want to quit smoking, bad. All of a sudden when they're pregnant or all of a sudden when their daughter or son is old enough to say, Daddy, in school they tell me that smoking kills people. Why are you killing yourself? Don't you love me? That's a good change technique. You know what I mean?
That's true.
It works for an awful lot of people.
Very true. Dr. Stanton Peele, everyone. Dr. Peele, where can we get more information about you?
Well, I have a website called Peele.net. I'm a columnist for a new publication called The Influence, which is theinfluence.org, and I write pretty regularly for them. I just wrote a piece called, you can look it up, it's fascinating, I think, what placebos tell us about how people control their own ability to quit addictions. And I review a study where they used naltrexone to get people to quit alcohol, and it was very successful, but there was one crazy thing about it. The group that received the placebo did exactly as well as the group that received the naltrexone. Isn't that a kick in the head?
Really? Wow, that's a lot. Did not expect that.
Both the therapist and the alcohol-dependent person, neither of them knew whether they were getting the naltrexone or not getting the naltrexone. And both were equally successful. Both groups were equally successful. And they didn't quit naltrexone reduces drinking, which we always think, can anybody do that? These people who were told they were receiving naltrexone and weren't did just as well as doing that as people receiving naltrexone. What a remarkable machine the human being is, their brains and their bodies. We can never get to the bottom of their mysterious power.
Absolutely. Let me remind everybody once again, this is Dr. Stanton Peele. His book, you can see right there, Recover, an empowering program to help you stop thinking like an addict and reclaim your life. Thank you so much, Dr. Peele, again for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
There
And
you go.
your listeners may be fascinated to know I'm doing this interview from Central Park, the boat basin, with my grandson.
Wonderful. We
Thanks
thank
for
you
having
again.
me.
We thank you very much. You can find Dr. Stanton Peele at peel.net. Also look up his articles at theinfluence.org.